I know for most people, when they hear about the zoning code, they may glaze over, may tune out. This is a unique, important opportunity to give feedback on something that at some point is going to impact your life. It's easy for people to come to Planning Commission when there's something they're really against and they want to come protest. But I'd ask people to also look for opportunities where they can come to advocate for things.
Welcome to the Community Center from Eryngo Urbanism, a show about bringing people together to create a new vision for how we want our city to grow and change into the future. I'm Kyler. I'll be your host for today. I'm an architect and design communicator based out of Oklahoma City. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest who will be helping us to answer the question, how do zoning regulations impact the way our city looks today, and how can we change these regulations to create better places that develop in a predictable and coherent way? Lisa Chronister, welcome to the show. Could you start us out by telling us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Lisa Chronister. I'm the Assistant Planning Director for Oklahoma City. I've been Assistant Director for a little over 5 years. Before I was Assistant Director, I managed the planning department's current Planning and Urban Design Division, which runs the city's design review districts. I did that starting in spring 2014. So I've been at the city for about 12 years.
Nice.
Before I joined the city, I was in traditional architectural practice for right at 20 years. I worked at both Oklahoma City and New York. I worked all over the state on K through 12 and higher education projects for several local firms.
Yeah, so how did that background in architecture make you want to get involved with shaping the way that policy works?
Sure. My first job out of college, it was just months into that job when it struck me how few decisions about the built environment architects are at the table at. For example, for most of my career in traditional practice, by the time the architect got the project, the site was already selected. What was going to be designed and built was already determined. A school, a clinic, an office, the budget had almost always been decided. So here's what we're going to build. Here's where we're going to build it. Here's how much we're going to spend on it. And then the building code, it had already been decided by a commission somewhere. So the rules that you're designing against have been decided. And then the zoning regulations, things that govern things like setback, parking, landscaping requirements, all of that had been decided again by other people. So there's these major important aspects of projects that the architect for the project wasn't even involved in helping to decide. So I realized that, like I said, during my first job out of college. And so that is what sparked my interest in, at some point in my career, being at the table on those big decisions. So fast forward full 2 decades, and I was at a point in my career where I was just looking for something different, not traditional practice, but something that would use all my truly extensive experience in just about all aspects of building design and construction. And through that, I saw the opening for the planner to manage the design review districts and that zoning ordinance implementation. And I thought, finally, this is my opportunity to exercise and explore that aspect of design.
Yeah, definitely. So if somebody listening doesn't know what zoning is at all, how would you describe what is zoning and how does that shape the built environment?
Sure. Zoning is a set of rules, regulations in the city's municipal code. All cities have zoning. So a set of rules in the city's code that govern things like setback, how far from the street your building can be, or how close it can be, or how close it can't be, or how far back it cannot be. So how your building aligns with the street. It includes parking regulations, how much parking you need, where it goes. It includes landscaping requirements, at least in Oklahoma City. That's where our landscaping requirements are included in the zoning code, how many trees you need to have, how many shrubs, where they go, what kind they can be, all that's in zoning. Zoning also regulates the allowable building height for certain areas of the city. It regulates how much of the site you can take up with your building. It also is what requires sidewalks and where they can be, how wide they are, site lighting. So very big picture, basic building blocks of site development. And why is that important? Well, before I get to why it's important, zoning also includes what allowable uses, what types of buildings and functions can exist in certain places. And historically, starting in the early part of the 20th century, the concept was that we needed to separate uses. And that makes sense on the surface, right? You don't want a house next to a factory. That makes sense. But what happened, especially toward the middle part of the century, post war, is that everything got separated. So we had houses over here, we had offices over here, we had shopping over here. So these things got further and further apart. So where you had to drive to them, and the only way you could get to them was to drive because they were too far or there weren't any sidewalks required to get to them. And so that's what created what most people would recognize as a suburban development pattern. Whereas early city development and what a lot of zoning codes are going back toward is supporting a more mixed use development, places that you can walk to, places that you don't have to rely on a car as much, places where you live on top of a business that's right next to a grocery store that's right across the street from a park. So you have all your daily life needs in walking distance. But zoning is where all that manifests. Oklahoma City's code right now, it observes this separation of uses, and there are very limited places where mixed use development is allowed without having to go through a specialized rezoning process. That said, obviously, there's a lot of people who do want to live in a more urban, mixed use walkable place, and there are people who don't. And the city's comprehensive plan recognizes that there are different strokes for different folks, right? Some people want to live on acreage. That's great. There's a place for them to live in the city. Some people want to live in denser, mixed use, urban core. There's a place for them and everything in between.
So, one of the things that you've been hard at work on is getting a new zoning code drafted so that we can actually overhaul the zoning that we have. I'm curious how we got to this point where that was the option. Why are we overhauling rather than just trying to make little tweaks?
Sure, great question. So the city council adopted our comprehensive plan OKC, in 2015, and that plan laid out a guide for how development in Oklahoma City should go for the next many years, 20, 30 years. And a fundamental premise of it was, why continue to develop on the fringes of the city when we have so much developable area and infrastructure in the core of the city? Why spend money on more fire stations, more streets on the edges of the city when we can develop based off of the emergency services and the streets we have in the core? So that was kind of the big idea. And then how that relates to the code update is, well, the existing zoning code doesn't allow that to happen. The existing zoning code doesn't allow very many different housing types. It restricts heights. It requires parking in a way that results in massive parking lots and overparked areas of the city. The uses are way outdated. Like, the uses regulate things like, our favorite example is ticket offices. Have you ever been to a ticket office, Kyler? Have you ever heard of a ticket office? Do you even know what
Uh,
it is?
it depends. Yeah, no, not often.
Exactly. I mean, before, there used to not be Ticketmaster, and if you wanted a ticket to sports or concerts, you had to go to the ticket office, and that was regulated. That's a use regulation. So things like that are outdated. And then there's things like Carvana, the Carvana in the tower. Well, what is that? Is that a car lot? No, it's something different. What about a ghost kitchen? So there are uses that are really no longer a thing. There are new uses that aren't adequately addressed by the code. So that's another reason it needs to be updated. So the comprehensive plan, it identified this proposed growth pattern, but it also included guidelines for sustainability, like, making sure we're improving health, improving air quality, reducing urban heat island effects, things like that, that are all exacerbated by parking and driving. The city has also invested very heavily. I think everybody has noticed, especially in the urban core, invested in sidewalks, regular bus service, bus rapid transit, the streetcar. There's a million different ways to get around now in the core that don't involve driving a car, often don't involve owning a car. And that has further revealed how much our zoning regulations require over parking. The zoning regulations are telling you to build this amount of parking, whether or not you need it for your business or personal needs. So back to how did we get here? It was really just, well, my opinion, the people, developers, staff, residents, people started realizing, maybe even in the late 90s, early 2000s, that we needed different rules or additional rules to make some development work the way it was supposed to. And so the city adopted things like overlay districts. Like Uptown 23rd is an overlay district. It's got its base zoning of various commercial uses, but then it's got a design overlay that further articulates building design requirements. So the thought was, well, we'll put overlays in various places, and that'll help us get more context sensitive development if we do that. And that has sort of worked. But what about other areas of the city that aren't an overlay district that still need more context sensitive development? Then, probably about 10 or 12 years ago, there was a noticeable increase in demand for infill housing in the core. When I am talking about the core, I'm talking about roughly from I-44 on the west to I-35 on the east, Northwest 63rd at the top, and Southwest 59th on the bottom, the core. There was a noticeable increase in the number of simplified planned unit development applications, commonly known as SPUDs, because the existing code, if people wanted to do, we call them small lot single family, instead of building one structure on a traditional 50 by 140 lot, people wanted to build 3 homes on 2 lots. So small, skinnier, but the code didn't allow it because the code specified a minimum lot size, it specified a minimum street frontage. So you had to go through this customized zoning process to allow that development type. People started wanting more small apartment buildings, maybe 4 to 6 unit type of things, 2 stories, 1 or 2 buildings, multiple units. So didn't support that either because multifamily in the existing code requires like 100 feet of street frontage. So we started seeing that rise in the number of applications, and that's what really told us that the code was not working. Like if the code is not supporting what your comprehensive plan is calling for and what the market is obviously demanding, then that's a big sign that it's broken. So the comprehensive plan was adopted in 2015. In 2017, we hired a consultant to do a report. We called it the code diagnosis, and it listed all the ways in which our existing zoning code did not support the comprehensive plan. And so that document was the guiding principle for our code update work that began in earnest at the end of 2019.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of info there. Do you want, is there
No,
anything
that's
that
great.
caught your attention that you want me to expand on?
Well, I think because I know one of the first pieces that's zoning related that got worked on was the accessory dwelling unit ordinance that went through recently. And you were heavily involved with that as well. What are some of the things that you learned through that process, and in what ways can that serve as a model for what's coming?
Yes, accessory dwellings ordinance was adopted in May of 2025. So it's almost exactly a year. Again, the concept for it was to increase housing types that can be built by right. And by right means that it's just plain allowed in the code. You don't have to get variances. You don't have to seek special permissions. You can just build it. And the comprehensive plan has a number of policies promoting the inclusion of different housing types. We know from other housing studies that we have done and other respected organizations and think tanks have done that there's a market demand for smaller homes, and smaller homes are often less expensive because they're smaller, and accessory dwellings are a great way to add households in the core because, like I was saying, the core already has all the stuff, right? It's got infrastructure, it's got, in terms of utilities, it's got streets, it's got access to bus stops. Something like 90% of the core is within walking distance of a bus stop. So it's just right to put accessory dwellings in. So it was adopted May 2025. We worked on it for 2 or 3 years. Yes, it was surprisingly difficult to get residents and policymakers to understand that in the zoning code, we were embedding enough regulations that would control their height, control how much room on the site they took up, control their overall size, um, control their parking. We worked really hard to be specific about all those design aspects so that we, planning, residents, developers, homeowners, everybody could have confidence that what was going to be built next to them was going to be modest in size, unintrusive, and potentially overall add value to their neighborhoods. So since the last time I checked, we've only had 8 building permits issued for accessory dwellings. The ordinance allows one accessory dwelling per lot on a single family home. It limits the floor area to 950 square feet. It limits the height to, I think it's 28 feet. It controls for balcony locations and side window locations. So there's a lot of exciting stuff there.
The big thing is that now if somebody wants to build one, they can do it and just apply for a normal building permit instead of having to go through that SPUD process that you were talking about.
Exactly. And another reason we started with accessory dwellings was one, we thought it would be way easier than it turned out to be. But just to use it as a test case to say, see what's getting built next to you is compatible in terms of height and size, and just to help prove we don't have to worry because there's other infill, missing middle housing types we want to allow by right also. And so we wanted people to start just getting used to the idea. And hopefully they are. I haven't heard or witnessed any bad designs for ADUs. The ULI chapter here in a couple of weeks is hosting a ADU tour that I'll be at. So I'm excited to see some of the examples. As we were developing the ordinance, we worked with a number of architects who we had heard were contemplating designing ADUs. So we worked with them. Okay, what do you intend? Let's make sure our ordinance accommodates that. And there was some give and take. Like some, we were like, hey, you got to make it just a little bit smaller. And they were like, sure, yeah, I can shave off a little bit. Some, we advised, hey, could you move the stair here because of various reasons? They're like, yes. So it was helpful to be able to work with people who were actually planning some ADUs. And of those, I know one is under construction.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more of those popping up throughout the city at maybe at a slow rate, but
Yeah,
it's
well,
not zero.
exactly. And that's what, people were worried that it was going to mean that everybody was going to do it. But like, yes, everybody can do it. Everyone may do it, but not everyone is going to do it. So some is better than none. And I'm hopeful that as more start popping up, that more people will be interested. Obviously, cost of everything is high. Building materials, financing, everything is very high. So there's not much of anything getting built really anywhere. But at least if and when financing and inflation improve, the zoning code will be ready.
Yeah. And I think as we move into some of the next topics, I think it is important to remember that these changes are not going to happen all at once. It's not that suddenly once this ordinance goes through, every building on your block will be torn down and rebuilt in a different way. This is meant to be something incremental. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit about some of the proposed changes in the urban middle area
The cool.
to housing. Yeah, whatever the term is, that sort of core area that you mentioned earlier. What are some of the proposed changes to the residential zones?
Those changes to the residential zones are mainly aimed at allowing additional housing types by right, that is, with no additional rezoning process. Specifically, what you may know as missing middle housing types, and we're talking duplexes, quadplexes, again, a small lot single family, garage apartments, which have largely been addressed by accessory dwellings. These are housing types that are all over the city in core neighborhoods. I live in the core, and they're all over my neighborhood. And why did they work? They worked historically because the buildings by and large are roughly the same size as a single family. It's just carved up into different units. So how do we do that? So how do we allow all these missing middle housing types into existing neighborhoods where there are vacant lots, plenty of vacant lots in some neighborhoods? We've drafted regulations that one allows for them in anything that's currently zoned R1. It would allow duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. It would allow two duplexes on a corner lot. It would allow a quadplex on a quarter lot. The overall guiding metric is two up to two buildings and four dwellings. So that's one quad in one building, or it's two duplexes on a corner lot. The new code controls for these by allowing the higher densities on corners because you have two street frontages to use for parking and access, and by allowing higher densities on blocks with an alley because alleys let you park and access the property from the rear very easily. In the city, there's only something like 20 or 25% of blocks in the core have platted alleys. So even controlling for that won't allow an explosion of these because only 25% of blocks have platted alleys. Obviously, every block has four corners, but again, these are historic housing types. They're all over the city, all over the core of the city. So that's a big change. We've presented that idea to focus groups of various sorts over the past many years. A lot of neighborhoods have reacted positively because they've seen the results they've gotten from the SPUD process. One negative of the SPUD process, there's a couple all interrelated. SPUDs are customized zoning, right, for every single site. So they're varied and they're very unpredictable because you don't know what's going to get decided at planning commission. And because they're all individualized, it's very difficult for plan review or code inspectors to enforce them because they have to look up every single time what the rules are and things get missed. As we're talking millions of pages of rules for all of these things. So neighborhoods in the core you've seen a lot of spuds. They're happy to see a more rational approach. Other neighborhoods are skeptical of the impact. I know people are worried if this is going to incentivize the demolition of older, smaller single family homes. And we have thought about that. And that's why the code update will also include a section for adaptive reuse incentives. And that stipulates if you're saving an existing historic building on your site, you can get relief from some other requirements, things like uses, parking, heights, things like that, because we do want to encourage that older historic homes to be kept.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you see a situation where there could be a historic single family home on a site and then a developer could use that structure and turn it into a duplex, possibly, depending on the configuration and everything?
Yes, I absolutely see it. That circumstance has happened. I mean, since I've been at the planning department, where, especially in our historic districts, like at some point, somebody will have turned a historic duplex into a single family home. And then at some point, a new owner is like, well, I want to turn it back into a duplex. But guess what? They're not allowed to, because duplexes are no longer allowed. And we're like, you know, well, that doesn't make sense. And the reverse. Here's a giant single family home. Nobody wants to deal with 5,000 square feet. Why can't we divide it into two units? We know, architects know, there are design approaches to that will make it, for all intents and purposes, appear as a single family home. Just, somebody's going in the side door is their front door. So things like that. I think there's a lot of opportunities. Yeah, there's a lot of very large single family homes in the core, right? And if families are getting smaller and if younger generations are less positioned to own homes, then we have to have smaller, more affordable places for people to live.
Yeah, definitely. I think another big thing that this new zoning code is going to do is, and I don't know this for sure, so you can fill me in, but some of the changes that will be coming to how different types of commercial spaces could be classified, either as a more auto-oriented development versus a neighborhood-oriented development. So could you tell us a little bit about how some of those changes might look?
Sure. Yes, I just a minute ago was describing some of our concepts for residential zones, but we have also been studying the new code for commercial zones. And to support the commercial zones, we actually are proposing two options, and we're trying to incentivize one of the options. So one of the new zones is essentially the standard auto-oriented commercial, right? There's a building with parking in the front or on the side. I mean, that's the prevalent pattern, right? Through 80% of the city. So from that standpoint, we felt we needed to allow for it. It's just too prevalent. But there's also another zone that is designed for more urban character. So with the building closer to the street, parking required in the back or on the side. And how we're trying to manage that is, instead of requiring it, we're trying to incentivize it. Like, hey, if you put your building closer to the front and you're parking in the back, oh, and hey, you're required to have less parking now, then maybe you get a little more height, you get a little more building coverage, you get whatever. There's a list of incentives that we think will be attractive. Also, I think it'll also be attractive in that it will just plain allow more developed area. Because right now, the standard setback for commercial zones is, I don't know what it is, like 50 feet. So you can't even, you know what I mean? You can't even do it if you wanted to. So I'm excited to see developers taking advantage of it in a good way. And I think in some of our, they're identified as transit oriented zones where heavy concentrations of like the BRT and other transit, that pattern is required in certain areas. So yeah, we've done a lot of drafts on the commercial zones, and those should be rolling out sometime this year also.
Something that I am passionate about that I don't think is probably going to make it into this zoning update, but I would love to hear about it if it is. But I would love more like neighborhood coffee shops and uses that are not too loud and not too obtrusive, but they still like really make your neighborhood feel like somewhere that you actually want to live and somewhere you actually want to be. So I would be curious to hear if there's some sort of an approach to that as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not going to remember exactly where we landed thus far, but so in the existing code, there's already a use called home business or home occupation, and that's like a small home daycare, a tax accountant, just like these small uses. We've looked at that to see if we can expand that to like a small hair salon. We've contemplated coffee. I'll come back to coffee in a minute. Things like artisanal goods. If Kyler wants to bake bread in the morning and sell it from his home, why shouldn't he be allowed to do that? So we've taken a critical look at all that stuff. But it's difficult. It's challenging, right? We may like the smell of coffee. The person next door may not like the smell of coffee. It's all fine until the neighborhood coffee shop becomes wildly popular and people are parking in front of other people's driveways. So there's a lot to balance there. And the main way we are trying to balance that is perhaps the coffee shop doesn't have to be in the middle of the block, right? Perhaps the coffee shop could be a block or two away, closer to a busier street, and still be close enough to walk to, close enough to maybe even smell, but positioned where it's customers can get to it easily, that delivery trucks aren't making noise at 5:30 in the morning next to your house. I've also tried to explain to folks in our various meetings that, okay, let's go back to ADUs for a second. Let's say that every house in your neighborhood got an ADU. So it's doubled its population, right? With the existing fabric, it's doubled its population. Well, guess what? The coffee shop on the corner has a better market for, to keep it in business. So I've tried to uh, encourage people to think of, what you will see, I hope, is not the ADU because it's in the back and it's modest size. You don't see that, but you do see somebody opened up a cute gift shop on the corner because now there's increased market to do stuff like that. That's what I hope people see. One thing I think is the opportunity of the core, because again, you can get to anywhere in the core on the bus. You can get almost anywhere on a bike lane. You can certainly almost get everywhere with a sidewalk. Yeah, a lot of people are skeptical about the extent to which people are really prepared to go carless or to reduce their car usage. But I know and a lot of people I know, we want to walk to the coffee shop. That's something we actively want to do. And if the city's investing sidewalks to do that, and if small business owners are investing in their growth, then I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, obviously, as you've kind of alluded to here and there, like maybe not everybody would agree with us on all of these things. So, what are some of the major concerns you've heard from neighbors, either through the ADU process or through the public engagement you guys have done so far on the zoning code update? And what are some of the ways in which these concerns can be kind of alleviated? How do we get people on board?
Sure. It is difficult. Planning department, from our various studies, I think we have a lot of valid, trusted information and data on the state of things. One thing that people always bring up that's been difficult to message is people, residents, neighbors, they don't believe that our infrastructure has capacity. They don't believe that if you add more residents to a block, that you're not going to have reduced water pressure. They just don't believe it. They don't believe that if you add more people on a block, that there's not going to be more sewer backups. They just don't believe it. We have spent a lot of time with our utilities department talking through everyone's concerns. We've looked at it by area. We've asked utilities for opinion and analysis of different areas and the whole water pressure issues. We have a memo. It's on our code update website, okc.gov/code updates, from utilities that discusses where water is coming from, how it's getting to homes, how all the piping was designed for a larger capacity, how all the systems are on a scheduled maintenance update and upgrade. It also identifies points at which they have found when most property owners are having problems with water or sewer. It's happening on the home side of the infrastructure, typically in the street at the point where the city water supplies the property. It's good. It's got the required PSI, flow, all the things, quantity, all that is there. But something has given away on the property owner side. So we hear that a lot. We hear it everywhere. And we've tried all this education and we have this information from utilities, but it's just difficult for people to believe. And it's just one of those fundamental things. If people don't believe that it's not a problem, then they're never going to move past it. It's always going to be an issue. So that's a problem we hear about. We also hear a lot of concerns about privacy. One concern about accessory dwellings was that people didn't want another set of people in the backyard looking down on their back patio. So we included some design guidelines about where porches can go and where sidewall windows can go, things like that, to try to address that. But people are, really picky about privacy, utilities. Those are the main things we hear about.
I feel like with the utilities one, to me, if I'm working off the same utilities as a larger group of people, that feels like there's more incentive for the city to fix it if something does go wrong, because you've got more people relying on that, piece of pipe or whatever it is. But I don't know.
Oh, sure. And in addition to our utilities, we discussed with OG&E about, electrical capacity, and they were like non-issue. And we talked to AT&T or T-Mobile. We talked to one of the communication providers, and they were like, our job as a company is to make sure we have the infrastructure to get subscribers. Like, that's literally our business model. So, they weren't worried about it. Everybody has a point. Some of the concern was coming from disaster response perspective, which, people are like, okay, what is this demand? Is it going to make things worse when our power goes out during the next ice storm? Are there going to be more, lines that get damaged and interrupt? So I think, that was a good comment for us to just ponder more about it. But like I said, the entire core has so much available capacity for development. People are worried about streets, about traffic flow. And I mean, I've lived in Oklahoma City off and on for 30 years, almost 30 years. And I can tell the traffic is worse today than it was 30 years ago. It's worse than it was 20 years ago. It's noticeably busier, but if busier gets me more shopping, restaurants, and amenities, then I'm for it.
Mhm.
I'll sacrifice that.
Yeah, I live in the core and I work downtown. I mean, I never really have a major issue getting there. I notice the traffic anytime I have to get on like a highway or I have to go out into the more suburban areas. Ironically, I think
Sure. Yeah. Yeah,
like
because
up by the mall. Yeah.
I think part of that's because, the core is on a grid. So if you're running into too much traffic one way, you just zigzag to the other way. And I get that some people think that people are going to zigzag in front of their house. I actually attribute our home and property safety. I attribute that to the number of eyes on the street. There's people walking by all the time. There were cars driving by all the time. So I would like to think if someone's trying to break into my house or steal my porch furniture, someone's going to see them. I live in
Mhm.
a neighborhood that has front porches. Someone is going to see you doing whatever it is you're doing. So, and that's part of what makes a safe, livable city to me.
Yeah, I think the eyes on the street is kind of a counterintuitive benefit of density, but once you start to realize that that's happening, I think it's pretty clear. Another thing that I'd say is a little bit counterintuitive is that if say a single family lot turns into a duplex or a quadplex, sometimes I think people have a concern that that will lower their property value. From what I've seen, usually assuming it's a nice duplex or a nice quadplex, it actually raises your property value because there's more demand for that area now. I
Yeah,
don't know what your thoughts are on that.
sure. That issue came up during accessory dwellings ordinance. People were worried that accessory dwellings were going to bring down their property values, and we talked a lot um, with the Realtors Association. They're like, guess what? The more square footage you have on your property, the more your property is worth. Like that's just the baseline metric of real estate. Again, to your point, as long as it's well maintained, there shouldn't be a problem.
And your I think people forget that their property value is based on recent sales in the surrounding area as well. So if your neighbor builds an ADU, that increases their property value. It also increases yours.
Sure. Yeah. And, there's lots of studies about mixed income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of both renters and homeowners. And back to the safety discussion, I also attribute that to neighborhood safety, at least in my neighborhood, because guess what? Not everybody is gone from 8 to 5. There is always somebody out and about because some people work at night, so they're home during the day. People who work during the day, traditional 8 to 5 job, they're there in the evening. And it's all incomes. And I think it makes it great. I think it's a great standard for a neighborhood.
I think to me, what excites me about a lot of these changes is that it really makes the city a more desirable place to live, in my opinion. I think I would much rather live in a place where there is this connectivity, there is places to go, I have neighbors, I have third places. So I'm very excited to see how all of these things impact Oklahoma City once they
I
are in.
definitely need more third places around my neighborhood. So I'm excited.
I'm curious. So you mentioned disaster relief earlier, which I think is interesting, especially given the context of Oklahoma and that the public meeting that you all had to explain some of this stuff recently. We had to shelter in place because of the weather. But at that meeting, my takeaway, I think, was that I was a little bit encouraged by it. And I'd be curious to hear your feedback as well. But it felt like there were voices in the room, not only who were kind of scared of what was happening and maybe opposed to it, but it seemed like there were a lot of people there who were just like, hey, I want to support this. How do I support this? So I'm curious to hear if you felt that as well.
Yes, it was a great meeting for everyone watching. We had a big outreach meeting on March 10th of 2026. The intent of that meeting was to get more opinion on people's desire and tolerance for the different housing types, small lot, single family, duplexes, quadplexes. And we've been presenting these concepts for the last like 3 years. So a lot of people have seen them in a lot of different contexts, but we worked really hard on PR for this meeting to get people to the meeting who hadn't historically attended or who hadn't historically been heard, because we have had all the meetings with the neighborhoods who are skeptical. We were pretty certain there were folks out there who were supportive, but just hadn't been able to attend, or you know how it is. If there's something you're upset about, you engage in it, but if you're okay with it, you don't engage. So we were trying really to reach those people to help prove what we thought was the case based on various other outreach meetings. And I think that was represented at the meeting. Here in the next week or two, we're also going to roll out the same survey that was given at that meeting. We're going to roll it out. When I say citywide, again, it's still targeted at the core, but we're going to do a big PR push so that folks who weren't able to attend or didn't know about March 10th, so they can take the survey. So we'll have even more data to that end. Our staff, we've recorded the presentation that we gave. So we'll do it just like we did in person, where people can watch the video, our explanation of things, and they can take the survey. It's all feeding into the same big dashboard, and we'll be able to use that again to see what people think and where in the city those people live, so that we can follow up with neighborhoods about next steps. Because as much as we have drafted and as much thought as we put into the new code, there is plenty of opportunity and need for folks, neighbors, to give their input, because we want it to be successful to everybody, and we know we can get there. We have to hear everyone's, honest opinions to be able to do that.
Awesome. Yeah. So what are the best ways that people can stay engaged with what's happening and in order to push things to be as good as
Sure.
possible?
Yeah, the best way to stay engaged is if you just go to vision.okc.gov, you'll see it. Go there. You can sign up for updates. That's where the survey will be posted. That's where the latest announcements of things out for public comment, public meetings. That's where all of that will be posted. So you'll want to bookmark it and sign up for updates. So that's a very important step.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you want to share before we finish up the episode?
Yeah, that, Kyler and I were kind of geeks about architecture and urbanism, so we like to talk about this stuff. But I know for most people, when they hear about the zoning code, they may glaze over, may tune out. I know for most people, when they hear about the zoning code, they may glaze over, may tune out. And it's a challenge of the whole project has been explaining to people why it's important and why this is a unique, important opportunity to give feedback on something that at some point is going to impact your life. So that said, I get the details, nuts and bolts of zoning aren't of interest to everybody, but I would encourage people to at least make themselves at least somewhat familiar with the code update project and what it's trying to accomplish, so that folks can help advocate for it. It's easy for people to come to Planning Commission when there's something they're really against and they want to come protest. But I'd ask people to also look for opportunities where they can come to advocate for things, because over the next 12 months, we're going to have several of those types of meetings at Planning Commission where we're trying to adopt other portions of the code. And if people think it's a good idea, we need people to help stand up.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hope some of the people listening to this will make the time to come and do that. Lisa, I really appreciate you coming on the show and explaining all the zoning code update stuff to us. And I hope to have you back on once everything is implemented.
Sure. Be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, it's me, Kyler. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to give the show a like, rating, subscription, or whatever kind of nice feedback you can provide on whatever platform you're watching or listening from. If you'd like to join our community to stay up to date or to discuss anything you heard in today's show, consider joining the Eryngo Urbanism Discord server. And finally, if you'd like to support the work of Eryngo Urbanism directly, you can do so over on Patreon. Until next time.